Please watch this video until the end to hear the full confession and see the final revelation. Chapter 1, Return to Hollow Ridge. I came back to Hollow Ridge because funerals are good excuses to look at your past. They let you move through a town as if you belong, even when you don't. My name is Ethan Rowe, and I had fled this place 10 years earlier with a scholarship, 2 suitcases, and the certainty that whatever had happened on the ridge was behind me. The ridge clung to the town like a bruise, a scatter of farmers' houses, a shuttered feed store, and the hulking concrete shell of the old bio lab on the edge of the woods. At the funeral they said my brother was unlucky, he got lost on a hunting trip and didn't make it out. They said the wolves took him, that the animals were desperate after a hard winter. People like simple stories. They like tidy ends. I said nothing. I would walk the ridge at night, remembering the nights when screams were younger and I was certain monsters were just that, stories parents told to keep you from wandering. But Hollow Ridge doesn't forget you. The lab remembered me. The lab's windows were like blind eyes, from the road it looked abandoned, a carcass weathered by rain. I had spent summers there as a kid helping my father, and the place was where the pieces of our life had been lab tested and sorted. I told myself I was only checking the building for closure. My hands found the old service gate and the rusted padlock broke like old promises. Chapter 2, Old Files and Colder Truths. Inside the lab the lights were dead, but my phone cut through the dark like a nervous flashlight. I moved through rooms that smelled of bleach and dust, and found the records room in the basement where, as a child, I'd once fallen asleep among the stacks. The boxes were here, surprisingly intact, names, dates, scrawled notes in a cramped hand. My father's handwriting. He'd been a scientist the town liked because he brought jobs. He had never told us what he did exactly, not in ways a child could understand. He said the work was for medicine, for making life better. On a brittle yellow form, dated 8 years before my childhood ended, a project title jumped at me, Endogenous Catalysts, Localized Phenotypic Activation. I read faster. There were patient logs, consent forms with signatures I recognized, and a file labeled, Rowe, Samuel. That was my father. Under it, annotations, and then something worse, a fragment of a grant application describing experiments that used viral vectors to unlock adaptive morphology, a euphemism my father used to hide the truth. The files hinted the lab was trying to trigger survival traits, to make bodies change in response to engineered stressors. They'd tested it quietly on farm animals, then on volunteers from the ridge, then on those who never left their beds. The last entry in my father's notebook wasn't scientific at all. It was a list of names, including mine and my brother's, and a note, containment breach, internal. Watch for nocturnal aggression. The paper thinned where someone had tried to scrub a word. The thought of that line, internal, felt like a finger at my sternum. Chapter 3, Hunger at the Window. That night I smelled it before I saw it, metal under rot, a hunger that had taken on a scent. Hollow Ridge had always had predators, coyotes, and the rare panther reports from hunters with too much whiskey. This smell was wrong. It came from inside me like a secret leaking. I hadn't slept in years, sleep had been a safe harbor I avoided. The hospital had tested me once, warned of anomalies in my labs, gave placating answers. But nothing had told me what it felt like when my jaw unclenched at 3 in the morning and the muscles in my neck hummed like tuned wires. I woke with scratches on my arms, wetness on the pillow that wasn't mine. The townspeople blamed the wolves. They set out torches and called for a council. Sheriff Klein, a man who had known me since I was a boy, looked at me like a man might look at a match with a frayed wick. He asked me if I had seen my brother's body. I did not tell him about the tracks I had found behind the feed store, tracks that changed from human prints to something wider, toes splayed like claws, then trailed off into the pines. Mara, my brother's fiancée, met me by the appointed crossroads. She had the bruising of grief and the sharpness of someone who refuses easy comforts. She whispered that the Ridge children had been changed in small ways, stronger, quicker, but they kept house and held down jobs. They were fine, she insisted, and then she asked me if I had ever bitten my lip so hard it bled and not remember doing it. Chapter 4, Confession Under Moonlight. I started to keep a notebook of my own. It was an admission booth scratched into cheap paper. The nights I felt the creature wake I wrote in shaky lines. The taste of iron, the sudden capability to see a rabbit through midnight brush, the way doors opened for me whether I wanted them to. One moonless evening, drawn by a sound like a throat clearing from the pines, I followed the trail and found my brother's old jacket snagged on a broken fence. Blood had crusted along the seam. Nearby, under the low branches, something had dug at the earth as if seeking warmth. I dug too, the way a man digs at his own soft thoughts. I found a nest, bones arranged with a careful symmetry, his teeth among them like a private offering. The beast was not only outside, it was my inheritance. The lab had used local volunteers to seed a trait, resilience through adaptation. In desperate hands, resilience meant predators arose to cull. The paperwork had disguised it as treatment, my father had called it salvation. But salvation had a throat, and salvation had hunger. That night I did not go home. I sat by the creek and watched my face in the water. Sometimes in the reflection a stranger blinked back, someone with two dilated pupils and a mouth that felt large enough to swallow a coin. I whispered apologies into the current, apologies to my brother and to the town, and to a man I had been who pretended he could stop the pull. Chapter 5, The Ledger and the Lie. I went back to the lab for the ledger, the final record my father had kept hidden. It smelled like ozone and old coffee. In it were diagrams drawn in the margins, sketches of a face half man, half something else, crosshatched with chemical notations and a single childish scrawl, "It listens." I found a recording saved on a cracked tape labeled, "Project Continuum." My father spoke, his voice thin and brittle with the weight of what he'd done. He said they had meant to give people the edge to survive floods and famine. He said they'd meant to be saviors. "We made a mistake," he said. "We made hunger." Then the tape snapped to static. It was then that I understood the real danger. It wasn't the change itself, but the secrecy and the way desperation spread. The lab had made a mechanism to ensure its own survival by making something in people that would keep the experiment going, appetite that required meat, predation that created more meat. The town had become a cycle. Each night the altered rose and some ordinary life ended to make room. What choice did that leave me? To flee again? To leave Hollow Ridge to burn on its own tinder? Or to stay and try, impossibly, to put bone back into the holes with which meat had been taken? Chapter 6, Reckoning at Dawn. At dawn, the town gathered at the feed store, and there were no more easy answers. Sheriff Klein wanted mobilization, the church wanted fasting and prayer. Mara wanted to burn the lab to the ground. I stood in the middle of them, and it felt like standing on a stage with all the lights turned on and the script gone. I confessed. I told them what I had seen and what I had found in my own body. I didn't hold back the part about feeling the teeth. The confession was a kind of exorcism, except that an exorcism presumes a demon that can be expelled. This was biology and will, and it would not be spoken out like a ghost. They looked at me like I was the final page of their neighborhood story. Some spat. Some cried. Mara hit me and called me a monster. Then she kneeled in the dust and looked up at me, and her hands were not accusing anymore but pleading. "There has to be a way to end it," she said. There are always ways, I thought, that require a kind of cruelty to end cruelty. I had the lab ledger, the tape, and a knowledge of the modifications. The village had pesticides and a great many traps. We could try to catch whatever walked at night, put it into a cage built for a man but strong enough for a thing. But would that stop the hunger in us who were touched? Would that stop me? Night fell, and with it came the animal call that had become the town's new weather. We waited with torches, with guns, and nets improvised from feed sacks. The first figure that stepped from the tree-line was not quite human in the way a burnt painting is not quite the original. It moved too quickly and tilted its head as if listening. The net snagged its arm, but it tore through the cloth like a question through paper. I stepped forward because someone had to. I unclipped a rope and looped it around the creature's neck. Not a man's neck, not a beast's neck, but something between. For a second it looked at me with familiar eyes, and I saw the shadow of my brother in that look. There was recognition there, panic and pleading, As if the thing trapped had part of a person behind an appetite it could not fully own. We did not bring anything back to the lab. We did not try to dissect what we could not know how to unmake. At dawn the town burned the outer rooms of the lab, the rooms that contained the vectors, the notebooks, and the cages. Fire is a tidy destroyer. It rearranges the past into ash. In the following weeks, Hollow Ridge learned to live with new limits. They kept doors locked, children indoors through dusk, and they spoke less of the nights. I left again, this time not in disgust but with a hollow understanding. The beast within can be stilled by daylight and by confession, but it sleeps in the bones of a place and in the choices of men who thought they could make survival a commodity. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give the video a like, leave a comment, and share this video with friends.